Hello everyone, my name is Michael and this is Brilliant Blunders, a channel that is all about me playing chess. In this video I'd like to share with you the first two games that I played in a recent tournament. The games are a classical format, 60 minutes per player, and in the first round I have the black pieces. And yeah, let's have a look what happened. This game wasn't very long, the spoiler alert. My opponent goes d4, I go knight f6, he goes bishop f4, so he is playing the London system. Against London I play the early c5, he goes e3, I go queen b6, so an aggressive line, kind of. He goes knight a3, I take the pawn, he goes knight here, so his idea is to trap my queen, because now he's threatening the fork with knight on c7, and I need to do something, and then his idea is to play a3 and trap my queen. Right, is that how it works? Kind of. So anyway, the only move here for black is knight d5, which protects the c7 square. And now the best that white has is rook b1, queen a2, rook b1, rook a1, queen b2. And we repeat moves, and the game ends in a draw. So that was my first round. I was a little surprised, as was everyone else in the playing hall, because after like 5 minutes the two of us got up and went to record the game result with the referee. But yeah, you know, I was thinking that at this level players just want to play a game, but apparently there are some who are just happy to take a draw with white pieces. But yeah, that's it. So that's game one. Nothing really to talk about. It's all established theory in this line. And once I went for this for the capture on b2, he can force me to draw. So if I don't go for this line, I'm much worse, because I would lose my queen eventually. Right, so let's move on to game 2, which is much more interesting because it didn't end in a draw after 6 moves. Okay, so next round I have the white pieces. So I go e6, my opponent plays the Caro-Kann with c6. I play the Caro-Kann with black, so I'm fairly familiar with this. I play the main line d4, goes d5, I play the advanced, pushing my pawn to e5, and he plays the c5 line, which is what I do not play, but I know how to play against it, right? So many people that I play online who use this line, they mess up because they give up this pawn on c5 and they forget to recapture it in time, but not in this case. So I take the pawn, he goes e6, I go a3. This is all theory, you know. I'm now planning to play b4, so he has to take with the bishop immediately, like this. Now I play this move queen g4, which is also my preparation, and it's kind of like trying to scare black, because I'm now threatening the g7 point, because he's moved his bishop out. And there's a number of approaches that black can take. So the main point is that white should not really take this pawn yet. So, for example, if black main line is something like knight takes knight e7, and if white takes now, black can immediately go rook to g8. And even though I can take, you can see that even though I'm 2 pawns up, black has already developed 1, 2, 3, 4 of his pieces. My king is kind of naked in the middle, just waiting here, asking for all sorts of trouble, with this queen joining shortly, with the rook being open, the bishop. So this is not really good. You see already we have this battery lined up, and this position is not good for white. So white is threatening the g7 pawn, but not yet. So if we go back here, so a better approach for white is to just develop calmly. So yeah, something like this, you know, where white is kind of preparing this kingside attack, black is defending, and black also has development and has ideas like before with queen b6 and attacking this f2 weakness. But none of that happens in the game, because my opponent got scared and he went back to f8 with his bishop. Alright, so I basically won a tempo here. My opponent has not developed any pieces, so I just go developing my knight, and you know, we have this calm game. So bishop b5 here looks okay, you know, I'm pinning the knight, but it's not the most accurate. Bishop is better placed on d3, because my idea in this line, I've already committed my queen, right, to this kingside attack. So the bishop is better placed on d3 over here, where it participates in the potential kingside attack. But it's not a bad move by any means. Okay, so my opponent continues to develop. Knight e7, I castle, knight g6, b4. I'm grabbing some space on the queen side, and also I'm making room for my bishop to here. He develops his bishop, and I, you know, continue with my plan. I put my bishop on the b2 square, where it's defending my advanced e5 pawn. My opponent castles. I go rook e1, he goes queen c7, and you can see all of the pieces are kind of converging on this e5 pawn, which is not protected by any other of my pawns right now. So I have to protect it with pieces, right? And we have 3 attackers by black, we have 3 defenders by white, and this means that my pieces are kind of tied up, because I cannot move any of these pieces. I cannot kind of break their line of sight to this pawn. So for example, I cannot play knight to c3, because that would mean the bishop no longer sees the pawn and my opponent would be able to capture it. So yeah, so this is currently where the fight is. So I play g3, you know, I now reposition my queen so it also defends the pawn, so I can move my other pieces. My opponent plays a6. And at this stage, this move is not really needed, because white does not want this bishop in this place anymore. So as I mentioned earlier, the bishop is better on d3. So with this a6 move, black is basically giving me a free tempo to the move I would want anyway, right? So right now I played my bishop to d3, and you can see that I'm kind of, you know, attacking this kingside, his kingside. So my bishop is stirring here, my queen is stirring here, my knight is can jump to f5 very quickly, my pawn is controlling this f6 square, which is very important, because very often black would want to, for example, have a knight here to defend the h7 or h5. So yeah, so I'm kind of preparing an attack already. Okay, so black plays bishop d7, which is, logical developing move. His rooks are connected. Although this bishop is still not doing very much, right? So it's like typical in the French structures where the bishop is locked up behind these pawns, and it cannot really move. And also on this side it's blocked by its own knight, so the bishop is not really participating in the game. Right, so now I played knight b to d2, so logical, I'm developing my knight. As I mentioned earlier, I don't want it on c3 because it blocks the bishop. And also I have ideas of maybe pushing c4, right? So now my knight and my bishop all support the c4 push if I wanted to do that. So that's another option, because at this point I still was considering playing on the queen side, and so my opponent also thought, right? So he thought, okay, he's playing this to prepare c4, and he played knight a7, which is a kind of passive move, because the knight goes further away from the center. I think his idea was to then play bishop to b5, and then after I capture, he can recapture with his knight. So like this, this, and this. And that would have been good for him, right? Because he'd have traded his passive bishop for my active bishop, and his knight is on a arguably a little better square here on b5, although maybe not, because I can easily kick it out and it doesn't really have much space to go, but the knight is not an issue here. Okay, so I played rook a to c1, so my idea was still I want to push on the queen side. I now have this nice X-ray towards the queen, which may open some tactics if some exchanges on the c file happen. And my opponent played b5. So his idea with this, it's now hard for me to understand what was the purpose of the knight a7 move, because now with this move he's taken away any square where he could have some active play with his pieces, right? So with this move he's blocked in his bishop, and his knight's only route back is to go back to c6. So, and this, the knight did not prevent him playing b5 earlier. So this is odd. So let's say he would have played b5. I was thinking about going c4, so not capturing. If he captures, I capture with a knight. So I don't want to trade these light square bishops. And now I have some discoveries, right, with my knight, which is interesting. He can cover that with his knight, and and the game continues, right? Or he can, for example, attack my bishop. And now after he moves his rook to d8, I have a move like knight to d6. So I'm opening an attack on his queen, and simultaneously I'm attacking his bishop, right? So he has to defend his queen by something like, let's say, queen to d7. And I can now even capture here. If he takes my bishop, I take his knight. I'm a piece up. If he takes the knight, I can, just defend or go away with my bishop, or I can even do this. And I've traded a knight for a bishop. I have these two rooks on open files, and position is good. So yeah, so these were my plans. But after he played b5, I realized, okay, so now c4 is not really possible because the c4 square is protected by two of his pawns. So I'm abandoning any queenside play. I want to play on the king side now. I want to attack his king. And I thought, okay, so how do I start my attack? And if you watch any pro chess, you know that they always play h4 or a4. So basically playing with the flank pawns a lot. So yeah, and that's like a common attacking idea, right? You start with the pawn. And I thought about it and I thought that actually looks very, very good, right? So my pawn is obviously protected here. He can't take it because I have knight and the queen protecting it. And I'm threatening to go h5, right? And where does this knight go? The knight doesn't have any squares. So here's the rook, here's the bishop, here's my pawn, which is protected. Here he just loses the knight, so he would only be able to go back to h8, which is an absolutely awful square for the knight. The knight would be basically locked out of the game completely. So I thought, okay, so, and if he goes h5, what do I do then? And then I thought, okay, and if he goes h5, I would actually take this knight, because then he has to capture with the f pawn. He has these doubled pawns, and that's let's see, and that's actually what happened, right? So I played h4, he played h5, and I took. He took, and now I have this move, queen takes g6. So I'm up a pawn, my queen is attacking, my knight is about to go in. It all looks very good. And so going back to this position after h4, what was the best move here was to move the rook. So that way you make room for the knight to have a little better square, right? And after I go h5, he goes knight f8. And I can go h6, he goes g6. It's when I was looking at this position, it was kind of hard for me to see if white really has any special continuation, if this pawn push has given white anything. Computer says it's good and white is better here, but it's really hard to find the way. So just to show you, the computer recommendation is going knight h2, black strikes back on the queen side, knight to g4, a b4, we ignore that, we go queen f3. Yes, obviously, it's trying to go here. If bishop takes, then queen goes here, and checkmate on g7. Queen d8, protecting the f6 pawn more. Now we take back on b4, knight to c6. And now the point of all of this maneuvering is that black's pieces are all tied up, right? So the queen and the bishop have to defend this f6 square. The knight is completely locked out. This bishop is still horrible. And white should use that and just switch the play, go with the rooks, control the a file. So maybe exchange one rook, then go with the other rook to infiltrate somewhere along the a file. This pawn is now hanging also, and that's how white gets an advantage in this position. But I probably wouldn't have found it in the game. Okay, so going back to what actually happened, because h5 was a mistake because it allowed this this capture. He goes back with his queen. I now go knight g5. I could have captured the pawn immediately, but I thought I would prefer to just continue my attack. So this move basically forces black to exchange the bishop for the knight because I'm threatening checkmate. This is the only way to stop it. So he takes, I take back with a pawn. So now I also have a pawn participating kind of in the attack. He goes queen e7. I take the pawn now, and my idea is, you know, lift the rook to h3. So go rook e3, rook h3, and again I'm threatening checkmate, and I just, you know, let him figure it out. I can also push the pawn to g6 and threaten checkmate that way. I also have ideas like knight to f3. So, you know, after he defends against the rook lift, I can bring my knight and add some further pressure. He goes rook f5, which is logical, you know. It prevents the g6 push because it pins the rook to my, pins the pawn to the queen. Now I went knight f3. He goes bishop e8, attacking my queen. And I now move the queen to h3. And I was thinking about where to best put my queen, and I already had an idea in mind that I want to attack this pawn, right? So I lined my queen in here, and I thought that later on, when I have the opportunity, I play knight to d4, the rook moves somewhere, maybe taking the pawn, and then I take here, and basically I force the exchange of queens, and I have an endgame where I'm 2 pawns up. And that's exactly what happened. My opponent played bishop to g6, I go knight d4, he takes the pawn, I take, he takes, I take, and at this point my opponent resigned. So clearly he did not want to continue playing this this endgame when he's down 2 pawns. It was, you know, it was not completely lost yet, but he's definitely much worse, right? So he has this awful knight. He's down 2 pawns. I have the passed pawn here on the e file, which is already protected by the rook. So a very, very difficult position for my opponent. Also protected here. My king is still safe. His king is not great. I mean, it's not in any immediate danger, but yeah, the black is much worse, and I completely understand why he'd resign here. So okay, so these were my first 2 games. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. So just going back to like I think the crucial moment in this game was here, you know, where I found this idea that h4 is a really strong move, and this kingside attack is what white should be doing. So yeah, so if you want to remember one thing about this game in terms of like learning ideas, remember to consider h4 moves if you haven't been doing this already. Thank you very much for watching. I will be recording recaps of my next games too. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave the video a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you want to continue watching my games. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.